Oh, you got her, dude. She's down.
Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another Fall Obsession Podcast episode. I'm Sam, your host for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. I am super stoked about this podcast episode. It's something that kind of been on my mind as I was talking with our guests a few moments ago. Been on my mind for a while to do a podcast about this, but we're talking archery. We're talking bow hunting, not just sitting in the stand or hunting tactics, but more of the mental game behind archery, knowing your limits as a bow hunter, as an archer, and we're going to expand off of those topics today. My guests joining me are several faces from our Fall Obsession crew. Our production director, Nick Powell, is with us. Staff manager, Todd Sellen from Michigan, is with us. And we also have pro staffer, Michael Teepee, joining us as well. All these guys have been on the podcast before, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this week. It's awesome to sit down with you, so I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
So to dive into this topic, I shouldn't forget we're driven by Ridge Rock Hunt Company. I'm getting so excited about archery that I'm forgetting that we're driven by Ridge Rock Hunt Company. Nick's rocking the hat there on the podcast video, but Ridge Rock Hunt Company is the podcast partner. I'll talk more about them at the end. But to dive into this, we'll just go round table around it and then start expanding off of stuff. But I want us all to share kind of some of our general experience as an archer, milestones for our time as a bow hunter or as an archer, and we will kind of go from there. So Michael, we'll start with you, sir.
All right. So started archery at the age of 12. I'm 38 years old now, so 26 years of archery experience. It started out with a bare bow from a garage sale that my mom picked me up when I was 12 years old, $75, half dozen arrows. Back in the day, that was aluminum arrows, as you guys remember. And the bow was almost as big as I was at the time. So needless to say, it wasn't, it wasn't the best setup for me. But, hey, I was just tickled pink to get an opportunity to get in it. So, yeah, 26 years later, things have changed quite a bit. I remember being excited to hit a bullseye at 10 yards back then. And, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how long I've been in the archery game. It's always been compound for me. Have dabbled with some traditional recurve, but yes, for the most part, been compound for me.
Awesome. Nick, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, I was actually kind of forced into the archery game in Collin County. That's where I hunt mainly. When I was growing up, I was mainly rifle, and Collin County opened up where we lived. Collin County opened up a bow season, archery only season. And so in order to hunt in our backyard, we had to learn how to shoot a bow. So me and my dad split a bow. We split it right in half, or like we went in on it together. And we went to, Cabela's, not knowing anything about archery. Went to Cabela's. They set us up with an old regulator, I think made by Diamond. And we started with the same thing as Michael did. We had aluminum arrows, thought those were most sturdy. So we went with those. And so I never really dived into it as much as I did a few years ago when me and Sam when I first started with Fall Obsession. So that's when I first really got into it, was just a few years ago. So I still feel like a novice in the archery game, but yeah, that's how I got started, got forced into it. But it's been worth every minute. So. Oh yeah,
for sure. Todd, how about you?
So my experiences with archery go way back when I used to hunt as a young Todd, a really young Todd, with my uncle. I used to hang out with my uncle to go hunting, and he would hunt archery. He would hunt and gun, and it was just kind of whatever weapon he chose, I was with him. And as I got older, I had to take hunter safety myself. And I actually told this story when I was with you this summer, Sam, on one of the podcasts, that I had a dad heckling me at a bow range. And for me, it was easy to hit a target. Back then I didn't know anything about, aim point and where you had to shoot the deer and that sort of thing. And I just remember hitting the target right behind the ear. I'm thinking, yep, that's a kill shot. And this dad heckling me. I just thought, this is easy. And fast forward about a year, my dad got me my first bow, which was a Martin Prowler with Easton aluminum arrows. And just kind of took off from there. I would go out hunting with my uncle again, and during bow season, I would use my bow, and I just kind of gravitated more towards bow hunting than I did rifle hunting. And fast forward years later, when I first met Heather, and I got Heather her first bow, and again I told that story about when she went out with me and she caught the bug, and we ended up shooting competitive archery. And so from that, and I've always hunted, like I said, I've always hunted bow, but competitive archery is really where I started to hone in my skills as an archer, and really started practicing some of the techniques that we use both on the range and out in the woods. So
Yeah. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got into it when I was a kid. My dad, he long time ago, like before he ever met my mom, before he was ever born, or maybe it was after he met my mom, neither here nor there, he bow hunted like 1 or 2 seasons, but he was not a bow hunter. He was a rifle hunter, and growing up with him, we always rifle hunted. But around September every year before season started, we would start watching the old Monster Buck VHS tapes, and getting pumped, if you will, for deer season and everything. And so I was watching all the Realtree guys and the guys that typically are on those shows, bow hunting and stuff, and I was always very, very interested in it. So finally one day, about, I guess, when he thought I was big enough, he gave me his old Hoyt compound bow, like probably one of the very first compound bows that Hoyt ever made. From back in the late 80s, I think, is when it was manufactured. But he gave me this bow, no setup, no nothing to go with it or anything. Sorry, my dogs are screaming in the background for some reason. So he gave me this bow. Didn't size it to me or anything like that. So going back and looking at pictures that my mom took when I was first starting to shoot that bow. Sorry guys, I gotta pause this and get these dogs taken care of. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh,
That's
you're
right.
good. Little 4-legged kids.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I told Heather to take the dogs because they usually chime in when I'm doing a podcast or something. So
Oh yeah, it never fails.
yeah, right on cue, huh?
Nick,
So-
are you going next month to the Snow Goose?
Probably not. I wish I could, but I probably won't be able to make it this year. Are y'all going? Is that in Missouri again?
Yeah, Mountain City again. Yep.
Yeah.
We've had such a warm winter. It's been above freezing every day this winter. This week it's supposed to get cold, and I talked to the goose. I talked to Squaw Creek, and they're concerned about the same thing I am. If it's been so warm, what's going to happen if a polar vortex comes down again like it did a couple years ago? So they're just keeping our fingers crossed that it doesn't break loose and it stays up in Canada. So
Yeah, I hope so.
yeah.
All right. Got that taken care of. All right. So I have pictures that my mom took of me with this bow, and my hand's like way back here. My draw length is too long. Nothing fit. I could barely pull it back at first. So, and no, not knocking on my dad at all. He, didn't know how to really set anybody up into a bow or anything like that. Fast forward to later on, I got a job at a local archery shop that we still frequent, Cinnamon Creek down here, and worked there for several years, got into a better compound setup, got into something that actually fit me, actually worked for me, and just started learning everything. I worked there part-time at first, eventually went full-time, and then became a tech actually, and learned how to work on my own equipment. And around that same time is when I started shooting. I shot competitively for a year as well. And then following that was my decision to want to learn to shoot long range archery and things like that. And so through all those stages and with the tech aspect of it kind of driving everything behind the scenes, I got to learn a whole lot more about archery than I ever thought I would learn. And that really kind of, especially the competitive season, it was really a challenge with the mental game on that one. I can remember shooting. It was indoor that first year. I can remember shooting at another local shop somewhere that was in the network and everything, and I was on track to shoot a perfect score. And I knew it, and I was trying not to think about it, just because it was in the back of my mind and everything. And we got to I think it was the second to last round, my last arrow on that second to last round. I pulled the crap out of it. I was a centimeter from shooting a 0 on that arrow, and I was like, "What in the world just happened?" And got my stuff together, finished the last round perfect and strong, but that right there was like a gut punch to me, because I was like, holy cow, I was one arrow away from a perfect score, and I thought about it too much. I let it get to my head, and that's when the real light bulb just went off, and it was like, oh my gosh, I gotta figure this out. I didn't like the way that felt. It felt so bad. I just literally gut punch when something like that happens. So
that's the biggest thing I realized with archery, that if you think about it, you tend to screw up.
Yeah.
But if you train yourself to do it automatically, then it's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes down a lot to, I mean, we can all talk, muscle memory is a big part of it, knowing those anchor points, having everything solid when you come to full draw, when you're ready to release that arrow, everything lined up and stuff to go out of the gun. But, yeah, if you don't have your mind square with that too, it's gonna mess with you a lot, and that's where when you carry it over to hunting too, it's a lot different, because all those little things that you're thinking about on the range when you're target practicing before season, they're not in your mind at all when you're full draw on a big deer. So that's why that muscle memory is important. That's why, making sure you're locked in, your anchor points are solid. Your body knows exactly where things need to be good to go automatically. That's all the more reason to build those healthy habits and to nurture them and stuff, because if you don't, you're not going to think about it in the moment, and it's going to cause you to mess up, and once again, a gut punching feeling at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And you're exactly right. And you made a great point just a few seconds ago about how, you build skills at the archery range through target shooting, but those skills could be different when you're in the woods. I look at competitive shooting, I look at target practicing versus being in my stand and shooting a live animal. I compare, hunting versus competitive shooting as baseball versus softball. There's a lot of similar skills. There's a lot of similar techniques. However, there's also some very different challenges with each. And, that's a big part. That's, when I used to go and shoot these competitive archeries and these guys would show up with 32-inch stabilizers, I would always chuckle to myself thinking, how are you going to crawl up in a stand with a 32-inch stabilizer and be able to? But then as I shot more and more, I realized the importance of having that balance of the bow and being able to adjust competitive versus out in the woods. So very similar but very different.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear, because Todd and Michael, y'all both shot big bucks with your bows this past season. So I'd be interested to hear while you're drawn back on those big deer, what kind of stuff is going through your mind in that moment.
Yeah, because those of us down here in Texas, we can only live through other people when it comes to that. So
exactly. Yeah, that's part of the reason I asked.
Michael, go ahead. You go ahead. Yeah.
Man, so the two this year, it's more of, okay, pick a spot, get the yardage, get my single pin dial, where I need it, before I draw back. That's what you're thinking. I'm looking for my opening. I'm not paying attention to his antlers anymore. as soon as I, notify, so as soon as I can see, okay, this is the buck that I'm after. This is a shooter buck. I don't care about the rack no more. I'm not looking at it. I don't care if it's how many points it is. I'll worry about that when he's on the ground. So I then turn myself and my focus over to, okay, where are my openings through the timber most of the time? What are my shot locations? When can I draw back based on his head movement, any other deer that might be around that can see me drawing? And once I come to full draw, in my head, I'm telling myself, okay, now pick a spot, pick a spot, pick a spot. Once I pick a spot, I say, in my head, I'm thinking, squeeze the trigger. And then I pull back, I settle in, I go through my I've got, everybody's got their own routine, I got a kisser button still. A lot of guys make fun of me, call it a binky. Call it what you want, it works, okay? Mm-hmm. So I get my kisser button lined up. Then I go next to my bubble. Got my bubble dialed in. Now is where I start to calm down, settle that pin on the, on the vitals. And that's when I start to relax. I tell myself, calm down, the heart's starting to race. You squeeze that shot off. And, that's what's worked for me now. Definitely not going to lie. 12 plus years ago, good Lord, I messed up on so many good deer. Mm-hmm. Sometimes never even got a draw back because I screwed up before I got to the drawback stage. But for me, it was a mental barrier to cross into that threshold of where I'm at today, of where I can calm down and not get all jacked up before the shot. And so for me, it's after the shot where that buck fever really kicks in. Yeah. But that wasn't the case at one time. I will be honest. It took a long time and a lot of failure to get there.
Yep. Well, the first thing that went through my mind were the looks on your guys' faces when I showed you the picture. No, those guys are sweating their tails off down in Texas thinking, man, I wish I'd see a deer. And I'm sitting up here watching all these deer go by and he shows up.
Yeah. It's a true story.
At any rate, I went just like Michael. I try to clear my mind, and when I first started hunting, I went through a phase of, drawing back. And as soon as I draw back, the first thing I think of is, oh my gosh, I'm about ready to shoot a live animal, And when I have that thought in my mind, I would do something. I'd jerk the bow one way. I'd get target panic. I would screw up my technique in some way where I would miss. And like Michael said, I screwed up a lot of shots early in my career because I had thoughts going through my head when I came to full draw, when I got to that anchor point. Then I went to that another stage where I was trying to incorporate a lot of the same techniques that I was learning in target shooting, where I come to full draw. I make sure that my bow is nice and balanced. I make sure that bubble is in between the line. I realized very quickly that in a live animal, you can't go through that whole routine, because as you're checking those things out, as you're getting to your anchor point, and when I first started using a peep, I'd find myself trying to get lined up with the peep, because I just wasn't comfortable with it yet. My first bow I had, it didn't have a cut kisser button. It didn't have a peep. So I tried to find my anchor point somewhere between my nose and the bottom jaw. So somewhere in there, which could be you make a huge difference on your shot placement. But at any rate, I learned very quickly that those techniques that I learned target shooting, you can't use in the stand. Mm-hmm. And so I developed this philosophy of try to get in as many leagues in the off season, because that's where you can get your repetition of shooting. Try to get in as many competitions during off season, because again, you're training your muscles to do the things automatically, as I mentioned before. So now when I'm up in the stand and I see a deer, I draw back without even thinking about it. I come right to my anchor point. I have that peep sight lined up perfectly. Another big tip that I learned, which made me a better target shooter, competitive target shooter, was at a guy named Bob Mack that I was shooting with one time. He's the president of one of the leagues I shoot in. And he was watching me shoot, and he goes, Todd, I noticed that your arrow is either to the right just a little bit, to the left a little bit. And when you're shooting target, that could be, as you mentioned, Sam, the difference between a good score and a not so good score. Yeah. You know what I mean? Difference between a 12 and a 5 or a 0 could be that much, Yeah. Whereas on a live animal, not so. If you're off that much, you're still within that kill zone. If you're within that vital area. He goes to me. He goes, "Hey, try this." He goes, "What do you look at when you shoot?" I go, "I don't know. I just pull back and then I look through my peep and try to find my sights." He goes, don't do that. He goes, look at where you want your arrow to land. He said, your hands are going to follow your eyes. Your arrow is going to follow your eyes. So sure enough, I started doing that. I started staring at my target and right where I wanted to hit, 12 ring, the center ring. And my arrow, I became way more consistent as a target shooter at that point. So I'm staring at where I want to hit, and my arrow seems to hit there. So I taking that technique, taking that advice, taking that information, transferring it to the woods, that's what I try to do. So as I'm drawing back, I'm staring at the deer where I want to hit it.
Yeah.
And this year was a little different because he was so close. Like I said, I shot that deer twice and hit it right where I aimed both times. But I had to make sure that there are other things involved. So you talk about, other aspects mentally in the game. You have to, it's kind of like, making adjustments at halftime of a football game. You have the game plan in place, but you have to be able to adjust. I had the game plan in place. I didn't adjust on my first shot. Second one I did, and I was able to put him down. So I don't think about anything. Like Michael said, I used to get wrapped up in, oh my gosh, that's a huge buck, and my heart would just, you know what I mean? Now I identify that this is a buck I want to shoot. Now I'm focused on where do I want him to come. I start visualizing the process. And so when I do get that shot, I don't have to think about it. It just happens, as I mentioned before. So.
Yeah. Man, piggybacking off of what you're saying, because while I didn't shoot a mount-worthy buck this year like a couple of you guys did, I was able to put a couple of deer in my freezer with my bow this year and a couple of pigs as well, all with the bow. And each one of those, like, I don't want it to sound like it's a sense of, hey, when this is your mentality through a shot, you've made it. I don't want it to come across as that, but with more practice in the summer months, with more actual shots on actual game, you build a good sense of confidence, a good not an arrogant sense of confidence, but just that you can do this. You have not just muscle memory from shooting, but you have a recollection that you can go back to on what it felt like to make a good shot on an animal. And
right.
I know, like with this year, we hunt over, down here in Texas, we're able to hunt over these food sources and everything like that. So in that regard, we typically have a good idea on ballpark what our ranges are going to be. I mean, and if you hunt a frequent stand, a lot of times that's anywhere you're going to have an idea on that. But we have some time, typically 9 times out of 10 almost, you have some time to develop that plan or to see it play out in your mind, beforehand. And I know with every animal that I killed this year, it was always, once I made the decision I'm going to shoot this animal, there was nothing else on my mind other than making a good shot. That was my priority at the forefront of my mind, if you take it that way. So, and from there, like, not just shooting, but my movements in the stand, how I'm getting set up and what I'm looking at, the other deer or the other pigs in the area, watching them, making sure that I have a good opportunity to draw back and make a good shot. All those things come into play all at once. And it is just, it's not even something that you're consciously thinking, out loud, like, oh, okay, as soon as he turns and then that deer looks away, I'm going to draw back or something. It's just something that naturally comes to you, and those moments when they occur. And then with all my shots too, I was I'm big on, especially with the opportunity we have to kind of plan stuff out like that down here in Texas, I'm big on the pass-throughs. I always want to shoot pass-throughs if at all possible. So every single one of those, I remember when I would draw back, same as you, Todd, I visualize where I want to hit the animal. I'm not trying to focus on just my pin or my peep sight. I practice enough that I know my anchor points are good. I know that when I come back to full draw and settle in, that I'm good to go. And if something doesn't feel right, I know it's not right, and I'm going to let down and regroup and figure out what's going on. That automatically comes to me, but I'm focused on the animal. I'm focused on where I'm going to make my shot. And the execution from there just comes. At least this year, it was a good feeling because it felt smooth as butter. You know, just to watch that arrow just pass through exactly where you wanted to put it. It's an awesome feeling. So.
Right, and the visualization, you know, you again, early in my career, I would say, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this, so on and so forth. You put a order of things in your mind, a sequential order, and you would go through. And not that I don't do that now, it just happens a lot quicker now than it did when I was younger. You know, you could be on step 3 of your process, and it's taking so long that now your thoughts are interfering with what's going to happen with your shot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but I think that what you're saying, Todd, is that same thing that I've done is, you know, when you're practicing in the backyard, you're doing competition, you're down at your local archery shop, you have all the time. Okay.
Yep.
So you can sit there and go through every single process, and you need to. Every single shot, you need to go through your steps, whatever it is, as your individual, and so then that way you're successful. But the more you do it, the more years you do it, the more arrows you put down range with this. When it comes to that moment of truth, like you said, you come to full draw, bam, 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 bam. You're already step 4, 5, whatever it is you're on. Now you're ready to release the arrow. And, you know, piggybacking off what you said earlier, Todd, about picking a spot on the game, the target or the game, huge.
Yep.
What you look at, what you focus on is what you're going to hit.
Right.
You got guys that come back to full draw, they put the pin on the buck. Let me take a glance at the antlers. I've done it before. Let me take a glance at the antlers. You go to shoot, now all of a sudden you shot 6 inches over its back. I wonder why. Because you weren't looking at the vitals.
Right.
When you pick a spot on these deer or these pigs or any game that you're trying to harvest, you've got a finite amount of time to get that arrow to that game before it goes through your opening, before it picks you up, whatever the situation is. And you have to get to the point where you're staring at the spot you want to shoot as quickly as possible, go through your spots as quickly as possible. Then once you're ready to shoot, now you can not rush your shot so that you can kind of just squeeze it off, you know, because like you said earlier, Sam, there's times where or maybe it was you, Todd, you get drawn back and you're just freaking out. Oh my God, I got to shoot. It's going to get out of my way. It's going to shoot.
Yep.
99% of the time you miss that deer or you wound it and don't find that deer unless you just get flat lucky.
Yeah.
And you just, I think what you're saying too, Sam, this year you watched your arrow pass through multiple animals, and it just brings your confidence level up every single time you shoot something with that bow. Well, it don't really matter what you're shooting it with, but with bow, it's such a mental game.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be shooting a turkey. It doesn't really matter. You're shooting it, you're watching it go down, or you're placing a well-placed arrow into that game. Confidence just keeps going up, man.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think with the target side too, it just, I don't know, for me at least, what I've experienced and what I've noticed, you know, as I've shot, you know, more in the off seasons, as I've, you know, hunted more seasons with a bow, etc. It, you know, target shooting just, it feels like and I'm, you know, saying things that I feel like we've already hit somewhat, but it feels like everything is just so magnified. Even if you're the most confident guy in the world, you know, you're thinking about everything. Whereas it feels like once you actually zone in on an animal, and as both of you said, you put your focus on that shot, the placement of that shot, where you're aiming with that shot, all that extra noise, if you will, it almost just goes away.
Absolutely.
It does. Yep.
You know,
As soon as you come to full draw.
Yeah.
When it's on a game, the anxiety's not there once you've shot enough, you know, where it is in competition. Like you said, you get down the last few rows, man, I know I'm shooting clean, haven't dropped an arrow all night. Boom, last 10 arrows, you drop one. And that's the anxiety part of it. You know, you get in your own, that's the mental side of it.
Yeah.
But when you come to full draw on a live animal, once you've put down a few, that anxiety starts to go away. You know, you get confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
But, you know, another thing is I want to speak about with me personally for my competition shooting that I have done over the years, you know, whether it's just winter leagues, 3D leagues and tournaments, stuff like that. Only one winter did I shoot a setup that I didn't hunt with. And I shot really good with the setup, don't get me wrong, but it didn't translate when it came to hunting season. And so I switched over after that following year, and I did it before that year too, but I only will shoot all year round with what I'm going to hunt with, the stabilizer I'm going to hunt with, the sight that I'm going to hunt with, and the bow that I'm going to hunt with. I know so many guys that got a target bow and then they got a hunting bow. That's cool, okay? Like maybe if you're making money, you're winning stuff, that's cool. But for me, trying to become a better hunter, I need to have the results in the field. You know, if I get 11 instead of a 12 or a 10 instead of a 12 on a 3D archery target, it's not the end of the world to me. Mm-hmm. My biggest thing is I'm trying to hone the skills with the equipment that I'm taking into the woods. Like Todd said, these guys got 30+ inch stabilizers. He's laughing. They're not taking that into the woods. Mm-hmm. It's not making them a better hunter. It's just making them a better target hunter or target shooter.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know some guys also that, you know, and when for the brief period of time that I did shoot competitively, it wasn't really a conscious thought like it is now at the time, but coincidentally, looking back, I noticed what I did. I had a bow for target, and then I had my hunting bow. And while during the target season, I might have been shooting my target bow and practicing with it, I did not stop practicing with my hunting bow at the same time. Now, different things can mess with different people. There might be people out there who can't do that, who can't be shooting two different setups, you know, simultaneously during the same time period, you know, and feel like they are in tune, if you will, with both of those setups and those intricacies. There's some people that can. There's some people that can make that switch work. There's some people, like you're saying, Michael, that don't want to or that can't. And but, you know, coincidentally, I realized that year, I don't remember that year as being a year that my bow hunting in particularly suffered. And I attribute it to the fact that despite me shooting target, I still didn't give up on picking up my hunting bow, if that makes sense.
Right.
So.
And I'm right there with you, Sam. When I started doing competitive shooting, like I said, Heather and I just started to get practice for hunting season. And then as I started to evolve as a target shooter, as a competitive shooter, I remember one year when I took a little bit of time off because I was so busy with coaching baseball, and we had our firstborn. So it was just busy time in my life. So we had a really good baseball team. We lost first round of the districts, which we weren't expecting. And so I was just kind of bummed on a Sunday. And Heather and I sitting around, what are we doing? You know, what are we going to do today? Well, I found a archery shoot, and it was a qualifier for the World Championship, IBO World Championship. And so I went out there, ended up qualifying for the IBO World Championship. And then I remember going into that with the same mind frame or same mindset that I'm bringing my hunting gear. I look like a doofus out there, basically. I had just a ripped T-shirt and everybody's all dressed up with their sponsors on and their shooting shirts. And I just show up and I'm just going to shoot. And I remember second day, I think I told you the story, Sam. The guy that I was shooting with, I didn't realize he was in my group. He was like the reigning champ for our class. And second day, first three, he center punched it. I think he scored 11 on the first 3 targets. And I remember thinking, you know what, I'm just going to aim right for his arrows. If I can get close to his arrow, aim small, miss small. If I get close to his arrow, I want to be really close to, top score here. So sure enough, I 11 the first 3. I'm right next to his arrows. On the 4th target, I said something to him and I wasn't like trying to talk garbage to him or anything, I was just trying to be funny, I go to him, I go, hey, dude, I'm just going to start slapping your arrows. I'm just going to start hitting your arrows because I seem to be shooting well. And there's no way. You guys can put an arrow in. I'm going to shoot at your arrow and purposely try to hit it. There is no way I'm going to hit it. But as luck would have it, as no luck would have it, I said this to this guy, and what do? Threw his arrow. He was so upset with me.
Oh my gosh.
He was so upset with me. So he took the arrow, breaks it. He's like, that arrow's gone. Throws it. And so, but it started raining. And at any rate, I finished in the top 50. And at that time, I'm like, oh my gosh, this competitive thing could actually turn into something. So I ended up getting sponsors. And one of my sponsors was a boat company. So that's when I ended up switching from a hunting bow. I had a hunting bow and a target bow. And like you said a few seconds ago, Sam, during target season, competitive target season in the summertime, archery season, I would use my target bow. But as we got closer to hunting season, I would switch over my hunting bow and use my hunting bow exclusively. And there actually wasn't much difference between my hunting and the only big difference was the let off, which I like to let off more on my target bow, not as much on my hunting bow at that time. But so I had two for quite a few years there as well. And so I didn't have the 32-inch stabilizer though.
No, I never went that far. No, and I think again, hindsight 2020, looking back, at the time, I mean, I'm not scared to say on the podcast, we have a different bow partner now, but way back in the day, for a while, for several years, I shot Hoyt, and my hunting bow and my target bow were both Hoyts, and they both had the same cam system. So I think that's another thing that was probably, again, didn't really think about it at the time, novice archer Sam at the time, but having the same cam system on both bows probably also helped me a little bit, just with some familiarity in when I did go back and forth. So
yeah, and I don't I don't have a lot of competition experience, but from what it sounds like from the three of you, sounds like it's all in the process.
Yep.
It's all in the process of getting your anchor point and having your process of when you draw back. Doesn't matter which bow you use, you're going to use the same process for each bow.
Yeah.
And through the competitive process, that's when I started understanding what an anchor point was. I started understanding some of this terminology. Prior to that, I was just basically, gripping and ripping. You know what I mean?
Exactly. No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some of the terminology, such as the anchor point and such as, making sure your wrist is turned the right way so you're not slapping your forearm, and some of those finer things, you learn that through that competitor. I learned that through that competitive process. And sometimes it's a painful experience or painful lesson to learn, but you learn it, So.
Yeah. Well, same, Todd. I learned it through the bow shop. I started working at a bow shop. They're like, hey man, this old dinosaur you've been shooting for a few years now, it doesn't work for you. You need to get rid of this thing. You need, we need to set, if you're going to work here, we got to set you up with something that, fits you. So, and then, learning just the terminology and stuff. And then, like I said earlier, later on the tech aspect, learning the intricacies behind actually, how these bows work, how to tune them, how to break them down and build them back up again. I mean, all that kind of stuff, and really getting detailed with it. But another thing I kind of wanted to steer the conversation towards, it's related to all this, but as far as what I mentioned at the beginning are limits as archers, and learning those, pushing through those barriers, if you will, and we all have limits. They may be different in one way or another than they were a few years ago, but even today, all four of us sitting here, doesn't matter how good of a shooter you are, you have limits. So I wanted to kind of steer the conversation that way and talk about some of those limits. And it might sound kind of weird, but I think a good segue into that is something that Michael mentioned earlier, just kind of in passing. He talked about his sight, his single pin that he runs. We'll start with you, Michael, and kind of expand on that from the gear standpoint on how you practice with that single pin. And because everybody knows, and probably the biggest question we get around those is, well, how do you have the time to adjust? How do you have the time to adjust that if it's just one pin that you have to put on every yard? So I'll turn it over to you to talk about that single pin, and then we'll steer that conversation into some of those limitations and everything.
Well, let me tell you, as somebody who was against single pins for years, same exact thing I would say to guys at the bow shop. The guy that a buddy of mine who owns the local bow shop would tell me, man, you got a single pin, I'm not going to have time to adjust range, draw back and shoot, especially when it's in the rut. So that would always say, that was my excuse. That was for years. I used that excuse. I used to run anywhere from 4 to 5 pins. Sometimes it got a little confusing when you come to full draw and you're like, which pin is this again? Oh yeah, it's the third one down. That's a 30 yard or the 40 yard. You know what I mean? And then you're splitting pins when you're shooting, in between. And he just told me, he said, man, your accuracy is just going to go through the roof. You'll be surprised at how much time you really do have to adjust those sights. And so I got adjustable sight back. I must say it was probably around 2010 is when I finally switched over to a single pin. And there is no way that single pin will ever come off of my bow. There is no way in the world that thing will come off my bow. I cannot honestly remember one scenario where I didn't get a deer based on that single pin. I mean, I'm just being honest with you guys.
Yeah.
I don't hunt over, here in the Midwest, we can't hunt over a bait station, a feeder, anything like that. So a lot of your deer are moving, where in those scenarios, maybe you have a little bit more opportunity to sit there. Plus, your yardages. So what I learned was I just would pre-range every spot I thought I was going to get a shot opportunity beforehand. It didn't matter if it was a button buck or doe that would walk through, I would range her or him. A small buck, okay, that trail's 25, that tree's 30. That spot where they keep coming out of the corn, the standing corn's 35. Then if I see a deer I want to shoot, I already know in my mind that's the yardage. So just knowing your yardage, and what I learned after the first year or two of shooting it is, okay, now shoot that pin at different yardages. Take your 20-yard pin, shoot at 30. Take your 30-yard pin, shoot it at 20, or, adjust your pin to 30, shoot at 20, see what happens. Is it just shooting 2 inches high? There's a lot of years I'll just set my pin at 30 yards, and anything 35 and under, I just use my 30-yard pin with how fast these bows shoot. Because these bows would shoot fast enough that I could just aim a little high, aim a little low, and not even have to worry about switching pins over. So for anybody on the fence about a single pin sight, man, I would definitely try them out because they are so accurate. It's not even funny. And it's just a huge game changer for me personally.
Well, you're setting your yardages exact. Like you range a deer and they're at, let's say, 32 yards. You put that pin on 32 on your tape, and then that goes right back into what we were talking about how you're aiming at where you want that arrow to go. There's no shooting pin gaps or anything like that. Yeah. So, yeah.
And, like I said earlier in the year on the recap of the 2 bucks that I harvested, the first one, he came out at 30. Well, when I seen him, he was 36 yards. By the time I put an arrow in him, I had ranged him. He was at 32. Then I moved that dial right to 32. The second buck I watched for quite a while and ended up getting a 45-yard shot. Turned that dial right there to 45. I'll be honest with you, even with how much I shoot and the equipment nowadays, if I was splitting a 40 and a 50-yard pin at 45 yards, I don't know. I don't know if I would have took that shot. I really don't. But when I can dial it down to 45 and just anchor and go through my motions and squeeze off, it's deadly. You take so much guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
I think Michael just convinced me to go to a single pin.
Man, I've thought about it for a while, and I set up, and I know I've talked about this in random podcast episodes here and there probably before, but I run a CBE. It is a 5-pin, but it's also on a slider, so that bottom pin's your floater pin, anything past 60 yards. And I love it. It works for me. And originally I built that bow, or not that bow specifically, but I got that sight and still have it to this day when I was going out to Montana and out there spotting stock in the sage, out there, Drew was like, hey, you gotta be ready to shoot quick out here if you're going to bow hunt. And so my mentality behind that was, well, anything under 60, I can whip up a quick shot real quick. Over 60, obviously, if I'm shooting that far, I better have the time, to make that adjustment and everything. So that was my mentality behind it, and it still works for me. I have this kind of the same as Nick, I have this new fire under me for maybe if I do switching over to a single. But for now, this is what I'm still running. But in running that, despite the benefits that I saw in it, I still have pin gaps, anything under 60, and I owe it to myself and the animal I'm shooting to know my pin gaps and know my yardages. So I went shot all those in between yardages, and I learned that with my bow and anything like that 20 to 30 yard gap, if you will, anything between basically 18 and 24 yards with my bow and the way I shoot, I would be using that 20-yard pin. 25, 26, 27 yards, I would be using my pin gap in between my 20 and my 30. And then my 20, what's that, 28 to 32 at that point, I'm using my 30-yard pin. And I had all that written out, and I memorized it by the end of it, for each and every single one of those pins. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of memorization. That's commitment to know that and know those yardages and everything. But if you're going to shoot pin gaps and everything, in my opinion, that's the level of preparedness that you should push yourself to know where those yardages are and know those intricacies. In my mind, it's more than just 20, right in between 25, 30, because you're going to range animals and they're going to be those random yardages. Well, what do you do then? Where do you put that shot? And going back to what Todd said, I know some guys have a mentality, man, in hunting, if you're with, in an inch or two, you're hitting vitals and stuff. One could argue that, but that's not me. I want to be precise, and that's just that's in my blood. So knowing those pin gaps, if that is what you're shooting, I think that's right. Something that you owe to yourself and the animal you're shooting.
So I was opposite of Michael. I started off with a single pin, and I struggled with trying to adjust. I struggled with trying to adjust it. Like you mentioned, here comes a deer. I know it's not at 20 because I'd always had my pin set at 20, but then I had my marks for 30, 40, and so on and so forth. I find myself more focused on that than what the animal's actually doing. And so then I went to, I'm not going to adjust. I'm just going to raise the pin up or down or whatever the case may be. And I really struggled with that. And when I started shooting competitively, I started off an IBO, and you can't use a rangefinder when you're shooting IBO. So I felt like shooting IBO, I got better at judging distance without a rangefinder.
Yep.
In fact, when I started shooting ASA, I went to a couple of tournaments. I think I was down in Illinois, actually. In this particular case, a guy came up to me. He's like, "You're not using a rangefinder at all?" I said, "No, I don't think you can you?" He's like, "Oh yeah, you can. This is ASA." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He goes, "They're shooting pretty good without a rangefinder." I'm like, "It's pretty easy," but. But to your you were talking about gaps. To your point, I do the same thing. A lot of people set their pins up at 20, 30, 40, 50, right at those yardages. What I try to do is I try to offset that a little bit. So like my number one pin is set at like 23 or 24 yards, because that's the typical range that I seem to get shots at, you know what I mean? And again, I got advice when I was shooting competitively. They said, don't ever set your pins right at the 20, the 30, the 40 yard mark. In competitive archery, the typical target is set out at 26 yards, for example. So you want your pin set at 26 yards, and then you adjust from there. So if you have 20 targets, you may have 11 set at 26. You know what I mean? And then the rest set at various ranges, further or closer, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I've grown to. And then, I also, when I practice, I really focus on making sure if it's a gap shot, I make sure I practice those religiously, and I make sure that top pin is toward the top, bottom pin is toward the bottom, and that's what I focus on. I don't try to pick a point in the open area.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And so if I can do that, I feel pretty comfortable. So.
Yeah, I feel like going back to me for the single pin it was just less confusion. You draw back. I center that housing now. I've got one pin right in the dead center of that housing. I don't have to worry about my 20-yard pins up here at the top, my 60-yard pins down here at the bottom. I've got one right in the center. I've got a clear housing now. I have more visibility to see what's going on. I don't have all these lines going through with pins attached to them. So that's a big thing that I really liked about it too, was there was just less confusion, less going on. When it comes to the sight house, yes, there's a little more going on when you're adjusting your sight. I will say that, but it's just the same thing as you guys are saying with gap shooting. A pin is what I do with a single pin. Like I said, when I'm just shooting all these different yardages, when I'm already preset at 30 yards or 25 yards or 35 yards, just find out how your arrow's set up and your bow shoot at these yardages. So, because I've had times where a buck comes in chasing a doe, and I know, okay, that doe's on that 25-yard trail, and I got my pin set at 30. Well, I'm just going to shoot it with my 30. I'm going to aim. I already know at 25 yards, I'm hitting an inch and a half, 2 inches high when I've got my 30-yard pin. Basically, aim for the heart. He's going to get center punched right in double lung. I've done it before. But I would say, man, I'm telling you guys, it's crazy how many times 90+% of the deer I've shot, I've had the exact amount of time to dial my sight to the exact yardage within 1 yard. Maybe I range them at 26 and they take a step. Now it's 27. I'm not worried about that 1 yard. I know my bow shoots flat enough, and I have the confidence that the quarter to half inch I might be difference isn't going to make any difference when it comes to that vital shot.
Yeah.
And yes, you want to be pinpoint accurate, but we're not talking 2 or 3 inches here.
Right.
Yeah. Another thing to be sure about too is that you have that, and this is something that comes naturally to most guys just because it's their equipment, but when you dial in your bow, dial it into your rangefinder, because they're depending on, I've seen it before where you get a rangefinder and it might just be a smidgen off compared to your previous one. I experienced that not this season, but the season before. My old rangefinder I've had forever broke, so I had to go get a new one. And all of a sudden, that tree that used to be 21 yards, it's now telling me that it's 20 yards. So, and again, we're talking about small numbers in that, but again,
make a huge difference,
what's that?
So it could make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It can make a huge difference, especially when you're trying to be precise, or as we get into the next part of our conversation, as you start shooting long range distance too, that's when it also will make a difference. So
you're talking about limitations, and one thing that popped in my mind is my limitations are the limits I put on myself, my own personal limits, you know what I mean? Not that I feel like I can't do it. It's just, I don't know if I'm confident doing certain things. You know what I'm saying? For example, I practice long distance, but I think the longest shot I've ever taken out in the field has been 43 yards. I'm very confident up here at the target because I know it's not going to move. And if I miss it, I miss it.
Yeah.
Like I said, the limitations that I have are the mental limits that I put on myself, and in the confidence. And the confidence I have at the course doesn't always translate out to the field, simply because there are other variables involved. If I hit high on a target, just means I got a 5 instead of a 8 or a 10 or a 12. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I hit high on a target out here, we could have an animal running around wounded with an arrow stuck in them for a while. You know what I mean? You don't want to do that. And so to build that confidence is just something that you got to kind of work. You got to work it out as the more practice you get, And so the other thing, like I said, I just had a conversation with my own colleague about different things that we tried this year. And I told him that I started doing that meat to get deer to stop. Like every deer I shot this year, I had to do that with, and they responded to it. In the past, if I did that, they'd take off. And so, like I said, just developing that confidence and not putting that limitation of not doing it because you don't know how the deer is going to respond. For me, it was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it actually worked out this year. And so I started using that more so this year. So using techniques that you may feel a little uncomfortable with, those are the limitations, just making sure you get comfortable with those techniques. So.
Yeah. Well, that was, go ahead, Nick.
Sorry. Talking about limitations is one for me is my vision. I have an astigmatism in my right eye, which happens to be my shooting eye. Lucky me. And so that's what interests me so much about the single pin, is because I do have 5 pins in my sight, and having all of those there seems to affect, if I can see that target in the background even. And so I'm sure I'm not the only one that has that issue. And I've also been kind of looking into maybe a sight glass or something, like a magnifier of some sort. I've looked into that a little bit. So those are some things that I'm probably going to change up this next season. So looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And that is a good point. Well, sorry, that is a good point, Nick, because one thing that I did when I switched, so I started looking into CBE and some of the sponsors that we had. I switched to the microlight by CBE because it has a light on it. That was one of the selling features for me, simply because I'm pushing 50 now and my eyesight isn't the greatest either. You can ask Heather, I can't read this. What does it say? But, I find myself, with the best chances out here when I'm hunting, typically right at dark. right as the sun's going down, last light,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I switched to that CBE micro lights just so I could turn a light on and those pins would glow a lot longer. They'd be visible a lot longer. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'll check that out too.
yeah.
I would say a tip for you, Nick, not having shot a single pin, go down to your local archery shop that will have some that you can look at. Doesn't have to be the one you want to buy, okay? But just have single pins that you want to look at. And really, if they'll let you put on your bow or even just hold it up in front of you like it's on your bow, I would try and see if they have some different size pins on there, maybe a 10,000, a 19th, and a 29. Because with your vision, what you're saying is, look, all these pins are clouding up what you got going on here. They're messing up what you got behind them,
Yeah.
which is the game or the target. Sometimes with that single pin coming up from the bottom, I like a smaller pin. I don't have any problems with my eyesight, but I like a smaller pin because it's that much less that's blurring out that object that I'm trying to shoot.
Yep.
And when you start shooting long ranges like we're about to talk about, the bigger the pin for me, even a 1900 or 2900 is too big for me when I'm shooting long ranges. And I have great eyesight, but I love the 10 because if I can shoot a 10, it gives me more field of view. It doesn't blur out my object and I can see more. So for your own eyes, I would recommend before you just go online and order something or call your bow shop and have them order something, try them out, see what size looks good. And, look at 50, 60 yards, 100 yards and hold it up and see what you think. And like Todd said, definitely get one that has an option for a sight if it does, or a light if it doesn't already come with a light. I've been doing more box blind hunting and stuff like that with a bow and arrow. Man, 10, 20 minutes of legal shooting light. I can't even see my pins inside that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is crazy how dark it gets in there. So if you're not already running a light, which you might be, but for those of you out there that may not run a light, if you're thinking about hunting out of ground blinds, box blinds, anything that gets darker sooner, it's basically a must-have.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially because our Texas dirt property, that's one of the main things we bow hunt out of is ground blinds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll definitely look into that. And I want to try out Todd's tip too of focusing on the game behind it. But I have found with 5 pins in the housing that it's hard to focus on the game itself. So I have to I'll open my non-shooting eye and see, okay, I'm on the right spot. And then I'll focus in again. And so I think the single pin is going to help me out.
Yeah. Well,
You just brought up an interesting point that I've just thought of too, in comparing, again, going back to target versus hunting out in the field. You can stare at your spot for a long time. That animal's not going to move. That technique is a lot different. So this is the point I was trying to make: baseball versus softball, competitive shooting versus being in the woods. You can stare at your spot forever on the deer, but they're going to move. They're going to, you're going to have other animals get in the way. You're going to have, maybe the wind changes. Maybe something will have a branch blows in your way. You know what I mean? And so in staring at that, you still stare at your spot, but there's a lot more that you're paying attention to, beside just that one particular spot. And that was the other point I was trying to make. With target shooting, you can aim for a spot the size of a quarter and stare at it. Really, when you're out in the field, you're looking for a size of about a clay pigeon. You know what I mean? And if you can hit within that clay pigeon, you're in good shape. Whereas if you hit within a clay pigeon and target, well, you might not score as well. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah, another part of that too, regardless of what site you're building, to echo what everybody has said as far as go and actually look at these things, look at the pin size and stuff like that. I know even for me, when I do have five pins in my housing, that bottom pin is that floater, so that's the one that I'm going to shoot long distance with. So when I built my site, and I went and looked at everything beforehand to know what I wanted, but there were 2 main things I wanted. I wanted that bottom pin to be a smaller pin size itself. So I think all of my pins are 0.019 or whatever it is, and then that bottom one is a 0.01. So it's the next smaller size, because to Michael's point, at those longer distances, I don't want my pin covering up as much as what I'm aiming for. The other thing, and this is unique to me, that I had learned over the years, is with multiple different pins and colors in my sight housing, I can't see the yellow whenever I am on a deer or a target. I can't make, because most, like, your classic 5-pin setup is like green, red, yellow, red, green, or something like that. Well, that yellow pin, wherever it might have been in the lineup, if I was shooting at something that was a neutral color like the body of a deer, I couldn't make out that yellow. So that was something that was unique to me, and I was like, I have to change that. So when I ordered my sight, I ordered green, red, green, red, green. That way I can make sure that I had colors that I'd be able to visualize. So with you going to a single pin, also hold a sight out there, or look at your buddy's sight who has green or red pins, or yours if you have those colors, and see which color might be the best option for you too. And then look at them with a light on as well. Because when you turn that light on, we've all seen it, all of a sudden they're glowing and everything. And I have noticed that my reds in my sight glow a whole lot brighter to me, or at least to my eyes, than my green do. So if I'm narrowing it down to one color for me personally, I'm probably going to pick green, because I just don't want that massive glow, going on in there. I have the different colors so I can differentiate the distances, but all little things to think about. Find a color that works best with your eyes too, especially if you're going with a single pin. So, you taking notes?
Yeah.
Well, my single pin is a green, and I can adjust it how much light gets through.
Yeah.
And so I can dim it way down or brighten it, and you might be able to do the same thing with your multi-pin. But that's just something I wanted to throw out there. Most of you can adjust them just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always wonder sometimes when I turn that light on, because it's so bright, to your point, Sam, I wonder if the deer could see them. You know what I mean?
Well,
I feel like if I turn on, it's going to light up the whole woods.
So that's another thing to think about too, because you don't always practice in those low light conditions. Normally you get home from work or something like that, and you relax for a minute, or then you go whip out your bow before it gets dark, whatnot. But practicing in those low lights and practicing with your light on is big in knowing that. And something as small as, like with my light, if I turn it one way, if I turn it forward, it just barely turns on, and then the farther I turn it, the brighter it gets. But it does allow me to turn it the opposite direction. So if I turn it the opposite direction, all of a sudden it's on bright immediately right out of the gate. And I don't want that, because I wonder the same thing too, sometimes, I wonder if I just flick this thing on bright, if that's going to mess anything up if they're close enough. And I haven't had an experience to tell you one way or the other, I suppose. Right. But just for my own eyes too, I want just a click forward, and that little motion right there is something that I have to practice on. I have to practice in those low light situations and reaching up, turn my light on, and building that muscle memory of going forward instead of back, something as small as that. So,
and you just brought up a great tip too, by the way, for our listeners here. You want to try to practice, depending on what you're doing. If you're a target competition shooter, obviously you're going to shoot your targets just like you would in competition. You want to practice like what you're preparing for. You know what I mean? Make it as realistic as possible. And that was the point I think you were trying to make here, Sam, in that you want to try to create the conditions as best you can. So again, when we train our bodies and create that muscle memory, we're able to do it regardless of the situation, regardless of the things that we can't control, but we still prepare for those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Low light situation, wind, what else? Branches blowing, like I said, in front of you, your reduction of visibility. And
if you
stuff
hunt
like
from
that.
a tree stand, an angle, shooting down at an angle.
I could have learned that this year.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way last year too. So,
well, when you guys got younger, inexperienced hunters that you're around, whether it's a spouse, a kid, you're mentoring to a younger guy or gal that wants to get into hunting. What I found with my wife personally, what has worked for us is I will take her out on the property that she's going to hunt, which is mostly behind the house. I will literally take my Glendale full rut 3D target.
Yeah.
She will climb up every one of the tree stands, and I will set that deer in 1 to 3 different scenarios that were actual hunting scenarios. She'll climb up the tree stand or the shanty, whatever it is, and we'll have her shoot, half a dozen arrows per scenario. And we'll do it like in August, 1st of September, right before we basically say, okay, no more movement on the property.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do the exact same thing. I do the exact same thing. I go up to my stands midday, you know, when I know the deer are settled down and not moving around, and just throw a target out in the field, and I'll sit up in my stand and just shoot a few arrows, and you know, rotate to the different stands around our property and do that same thing.
Yeah.
Again, trying to recreate that realism, you know.
Yeah, and it's not always realistic for everyone. You know, you might
Right.
live an hour from where you hunt. So we're not saying that it's realistic for everyone, but when it is, do it. And then obviously there's 3D ranges and 3D shoots. A lot of people have within an hour of their house that have tower blinds and stuff like that. So you can get used to shooting elevated. But if you're going to be a tree stand hunter, an elevated hunter of any sort, man, you got to practice, and you got to aim for your exit. And you got to practice from elevated situation. You can't just sit there and stand on flat ground and shoot all year long and think you're going to go climb up in a tree 20, 25 feet in the air and expect to hit the same spots that you did before. It doesn't work that way. You got to bend at the waist. You got to realize that just where it looked good on the ground at 25 yards doesn't translate to when you're in the air 25 feet and you're shooting at 25 yards. It's a totally different ball game. So for the novice guys and gals that are out there, do your due diligence. Put the extra time in. That's going to make you more successful in the fall.
Yeah. Another thing I thought of too, just in the preparing yourself and, you know, during the off season and everything, is one thing that I've tried to do that's applicable to kind of the time we're in right now. You know, because it seems like, you know, through the summer, through the off season, everybody will practice. Obviously, we try to stay sharp, and then we're hunting actually out there in the woods, you know, during the season. But it's like right now, right after the season ends, I know a lot of guys that kind of they back off a little bit. They take a break, you know, and rightfully so. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but and I'm saying this because I do it. But one thing that I like to try to do when I'm getting back into it, when it's like, all right, it's time to turn it back on and get back into practice, you know, not August, like early in the year, you know, be prepared. But the first few times that I go out and shoot, I'll spend the first 5 or 10 minutes shooting. I'll put my target at 5 yards, where distance, range, pins, doesn't matter. And all I will do is shoot for muscle memory at that point. I'll draw back. I'll make sure I'm pointing at my target. Obviously, I want to be safe, but then before I settle in, I'll close my eyes. I'll settle in, and I'll work on my release. My release is a big one for me because back in the day I had a bad habit of punching my trigger, especially when I switched to a thumb release. So I don't want to fall back in that habit. So I'll work on my release, and then also just start rebuilding that muscle memory in my mind on where my anchor points are. What does it feel like when I get to full draw and everything's locked in, you know? And I won't do that the whole time. Like I said, just 5 or 10 minutes just to start each time that I'm going out there shooting. And I won't do that the whole year either. It's just after that end of season break that some guys fall into, myself included, that's one of the ways that I'll bring myself back out of that to just hammer those things back into my mind. So
that's a great point. I heard a pretty good analogy years ago about how it takes over 1,000 shots to train your muscles to do exactly, or 1,000 repetitions to train your muscles to do exactly what you want them to do. But it only takes 1 week to lose that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's
1
true.
week off to lose that. So to your point, like you said, you're retraining those muscles every time you pick up. Same thing. I'm in that situation right now. I haven't shot my bow since the end of bow season. You know what I mean? Because we've been going through rifle season and so on and so forth. Once January got here, I took some time off. You know what I mean? And so today I just started looking at shoots. That there was one today I could have went to, but next week I'm going to a shoot here. I'll do the same thing. So right now it's a little trickier to get outside and shoot because it's cold and it's snowy now. The winter finally hit, but you know, prior to that, you know, if usually if it's not snowy, I'll throw a target out and get out there and shoot before. So you know, because I haven't shot in a while, when I go to shoot, I'll make sure I get there early and do the things that you talked about. Try to retrain my muscles in a short period of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because a lot of that will come back. You know what I mean? But you won't be at the point that you were going into hunting season because you shot so much leading up to it. So
Yeah.
Well, and we call that blind bailing from where I'm from, you know, where you just literally draw back and shoot without looking, and, you know, you're within 5 yards. And I used to have to do that a lot. when I had target panic.
Yeah.
My pin would get close to where I wanted to hit, freak out. I used to come up, I'd try coming up from the bottom. I'd punch it, I'd shoot low. Come up from the top, I'd punch it, I'd shoot high. And so not only was I punching the trigger, but I was getting target anxiety, where I was getting target panic when I'd get that pin on there. If I didn't have my finger in front of the trigger, I could sit there with the pin on there all stinking day long, right there in that 12 ring or the 5 spot, whatever you're shooting at. But as soon as my finger was in front of the trigger, I had this anxiety where I had to smash it.
Yeah.
And I bet you I blind bailed for months, and I probably shot thousands of arrows to try and break that. And anytime it starts to creep back up, I go right back to it. And it just doesn't take as much extra work now to get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, to that point, a unique thing I learned this about myself back when I shot competitively, and I don't really even know. I'm probably a little bit better at it, but I still deal with it from time to time, is I can't pull up on a shot. If I end up with my pin below my target, for whatever reason, I have 9 times out of 10, I have a mental block in my mind and I cannot pull up. I have to let down, reset, redraw, shoot again. So in knowing that about myself, maybe this isn't the best thing. Maybe I should have tried to address the problem a little bit more directly, but I ended up just making a habit of coming down on my target from above. I'm not sky drawn by any means, but starting above my target and bringing it down into my target, and then executing my shot from there. And it's worked for me. Maybe that'll be my project this year. Maybe I'll try to break my habits a little bit more. But I mean, it's we all have those intricacies that are unique to each one of us that we deal with and that we have to overcome. So
I'm 100% the exact same as you, Sam. I can't, if I'm below, I can't lift up. I just can't do it. I'm either gonna shoot low and miss or let down, like you said. And like I said, I became a better shooter when I learned that, your hands are going to follow your eyes, stare at that point on your target, and I'd have to start up. And as soon as my arrow would hit that point I'm staring at, or my pin would hit that point I'm staring at, I'd release my arrow. And there are times that I get I get shooter's panic, but for the most part, I became a really, really good shooter, just based on staring at the spot I want to hit and coming from the top down. And like I said, as soon as my pin hit that area, I'd release. If I didn't shoot when that pin hit the area, it would keep going lower, and then I was in trouble because I can't lift back up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, over the years, I've actually gotten myself to the point where I've tried coming up from the bottom, did the same thing you guys are talking about, would shoot low almost every time, or I would yank up when I'd shoot, and I'd shoot high.
Yep, and so that
or I'd come from the top, same thing. How I personally broke it was now I will set my pin on the target where I want to hit before I come to full draw. And then when I come back to full draw, that pin is really close to where I want it. And so there's just a slight little adjustment one way or the other. And at first, what was difficult about that was my mind would tell me, shoot, because your pin's where you want it. And I had to just tell myself over and over and over again, you don't have to shoot. You don't have to shoot. Take your time.
Yeah.
And so that's really worked good for me. Even when I'm shooting deer or I'm shooting a target, I will actually set my pin where I want it before I come to full draw. I don't shoot too many pounds where I have to sky draw. I shoot enough poundage that I can just do a straight draw even in the dead of the winter. And so that's really worked for me. And I mean, everybody's got a different way, but you got to figure out what way works best for you.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're diving deep into our time here today as far as how long we're going, but there's one more thing I wanted to be sure that we hit, and we've almost gone there a couple times throughout our conversation today, but we haven't fully committed, and that was talking about more long distance shooting and everything. And I know, Todd, you mentioned something a little bit longer ago about how you practice out to certain distances, longer ranges. But then at the end of the day, there's another level of what realistically you probably are more than likely going to shoot a deer at or with under. And then coincidentally, Michael, I think in our last podcast several weeks ago, we kind of touched briefly on essentially the same concept as well about how there's these long distances we practice to. So I wanted to talk to everybody about kind of your mindset behind that. And Todd, we'll start with you, but where do you practice out to? What is your realistic range that you would kill a deer in? And then answer the questions of, one, why, and then two, if that's your range that you kill a deer in, then why bother? Because I'm sure we all may know, but I'm sure there's people who are asking the question. So
a couple different things. First of all, I feel really comfortable 40 yards and in. That's where I spend the majority of my time practicing, because that's typically where you're getting your shots. Here, it's usually 30 yards and in, right on top of us. If it's not 30 yards and in, they're usually out further. You know what I mean? You're
Right.
talking 50, 60, 70 yards. And so I practice longer distances because the mature bucks, this year was a pretty big exception, because I had him at 5 yards, at one point. But typically the big bucks that I've had come in always get hung up around 50, 55, 60 yards. And then I never have another opportunity. I'll see them, but then they're out 100, 200, 300 yards. And, I can't get them in range close enough to where I feel okay shooting a bow. And so I practice out to about 60 yards. Not only that, but, we're working on right now, you guys know that we're working on trying to get an elk hunt, muley hunt in Colorado in 2024. And I know shooting muley, those are longer distances. So I've got to, I practice that to try to get better at, you know what I mean?
yeah.
I know out at longer distances that I can hit the spots that I want to hit. However, I'm not confident enough when I'm in the field, because my groupings aren't as tight at 50, 60 yards as they are at 40 yards and in, for example.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, and I know longer distance too, the smallest mistake could be the difference. It can make a huge difference on how far over, up, or down your arrow hits. You know what I mean? And so, it could be just a matter of that. And now your arrow is completely off, or maybe you're spining or hitting that fatty tissue in the brisket or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, so I practice longer distances, because out here, it seems like the mature bucks always get hung up at longer distances. So, I still haven't pulled the trigger on one yet, but I'm getting closer to it. Like I said, we had Mr. Elke a couple years ago. First time I saw him, Mr. Elke was the one that my daughter named. He was hung up at 52 yards, and I had practiced out to that point, but I thought, I don't want to wound him. This was like the second day of bow season. I didn't want to wound him in front of my daughter, for one.
Right.
Wound him in general, because I didn't want this big guy running around, the rest of the season wounded. But at that point, it was pretty evident that I needed to start practicing at longer distances more often. So,
Michael, what about you?
Yeah. So over the years, it's obviously my distances that I practice at and feel comfortable taking a shot at a wild animal have increased as technology has increased, as the bow equipment has increased, as my knowledge has increased, and I would say mostly equipment. To try and compare today's archery equipment to even 10, 20 years ago, it's not exactly the same. Maybe 10 years ago is close, but the equipment is just so advanced, and it's actually set up very well for the long range shooter. Not necessarily the long range hunter, but the long range shooter. And ever since I started going out west in 2015, I put a big emphasis that summer before my first elk hunt out in Colorado that I needed to be able to shoot longer ranges. Not only is an elk a way bigger target than your standard whitetail here in the Midwest, but I knew there was a possibility I'm not going to get a 20, 30 yard realistic shot like you do in the whitetail woods. A lot of run and gun and a lot of spot and stalking. Maybe you're trying to call them in. And so, I did some research and I practiced a lot that year in 15 at 100 yards. Never took a shot at 100 yards at an elk, even at that big of a kill zone. But that's when it started for me. Back in 2015 is when I started shooting 100 yards plus every single off season, getting ready for hunting out west is how it started. I fell in love with it. It became so much more challenging to shoot out past 80 yards that I craved it. I guess that's the way to say it. I craved that attention to detail that was needed to be able to be accurate at that type of distance, even with today's technology. The slightest movement, you're off by 6, 8, 12 inches, not even a problem. So once I got more efficient at those longer ranges, it was just more thrilling, more exciting during the off season. Sometimes, how many times you want to punch a target at 20 yards in the off season, 30 yards in the off season, slapping arrows. Next thing you know, I'm Robin Hood and tearing fletchings off. Doggone it. This isn't exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm excited because I got a tight group, but I don't really want to have to make another trip to the archery shop if I don't have to. And so, I just started just shooting further. And now I know, like we said in the podcast before, this year in particular, I wasn't going out west in the fall of 22. And so all season, 60 to 80 yards was my off season. I rarely shot inside of 60. I will right before season just to make sure everything's buttoned up and that, something didn't get bumped by any chance. So I will go through and shoot 20, 30, 40 all the way out. My effective killing range has usually been half of what I feel comfortable at when I'm shooting a target. So if I feel very comfortable shooting a target at 100 yards, then I feel pretty comfortable shooting an animal at 50 yards. Now, granted, every scenario is different and the deer are very jumpy. Doesn't mean I'm going to take a 50-yard shot every time I see a deer.
Right.
But I have the confidence to make that 50-yard shot if the stars align. It doesn't mean I'm going to force the envelope and just start wounding animals just because I can hit a target at 100 yards.
Right.
So, I mean, just like this last year, like we just talked about, I shot one at 32 yards. I shot one at 45 yards. I shot a doe at like 21, 22 yards, all with archery equipment, all quick, clean kills. Like I said before, that 45-yard shot would not have taken place this year if I had not spent all off season at 60 and 80 yards. There's no way. Yeah. I don't care if I was shooting at 50 yards. If I would have been shooting at 50 yards all off season, I would have not taken a 45-yard shot. I don't care if I was 12 ring and every shot at 50. I would not have the confidence to draw that bow back and make it happen. That's me personally. Mm-hmm. I've killed several deer, mule deer and whitetail between 41 and 75 yards with my bow equipment. It's not something I pride myself in, but at the same time, it is nice to be able to draw your bow back and feel confident in the shot before you take it. My biggest mule deer that I shot out in Nebraska in 2020, he wouldn't be on the wall right now if I couldn't shoot 75 yards.
Yeah.
That's all there's to it. But I felt confident. I knew I was going out west. That year, I spent a lot of time shooting between 100 and 120 yards religiously, barely ever stepped inside of 100. So that's what works for me. But I think everybody has to figure out what's their own capable limits, and a lot of it's mental. But when you can see yourself consistently shoot long distances accurately and efficiently, you become more confident.
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Nick, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with what you are hunting, and I kind of fall in the category that Todd does. A lot of my shots are going to be 20, 25, maybe 30 yards. I know all of the ground blinds that we have out in Texas dirt are around 30 yards. And also it comes with your equipment. Like I have a fixed 5-pin sight. And so my furthest one is 60 yards. And so that's as far as I've practiced. That's as far as I'm comfortable. But I'm probably not going to take a shot anywhere further than 40.
Yeah.
And so that's just a lot of the times that's where I'm practicing, because I know that's realistic in what I'm going to be shooting in the field. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to practice at 60, because if I practice at 60, that 20-yard shot's going to be cake. And so I do. And I don't consistently practice at 60, but if I get a wild hair one day when I'm out back, I'll throw a couple at 60. But most of my practicing is going to be anywhere from 20 to 40. And that's just where I stay. That's where I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I think all y'all have hit the nail on the head with that. I know the farthest I've ever shot a whitetail at, I think, was 48. I did shoot a doe at 48 yards one time. It was especially back in those days, I probably shouldn't have shot. It was probably more luck than anything back in that day. But and then after that, The farthest one I've killed an animal at was my pronghorn. I shot him at 42. So those are the only two animals I've ever killed at 40 plus. Everything else has been under that. And then this year, the farthest shot that I took and killed an animal at was 25 yards this year. And to y'all's points, I practice out to 100. Like that's where I put my goal and set my goal, especially after Montana. Not because I'm going to shoot a deer at that range in Texas, but because if I can make shots at that range, then the 20, 30 yard shots here in Texas, if I miss, it's because I'm an idiot, in my opinion. You know, it's because I messed up. But flip that over, you go out west, it's a different ball game. You know, 100 yards might be the closest you get, and I know that from year 2 in Montana. And I'll make the story short. I've told it before on the podcast, but long story short, the closest I got to a giant shooter buck was 120 yards. And I had that thought in my mind on, I'm good at 100. I know I am. I could throw it out there and see what happens. But the smart hunter got the better of me, thankfully, and was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to just wing one like that at this range. Yeah. So, but all that, I really think that the farther out you practice, it makes you better at the short distances. And just to put that nail in the coffin with the reassuring myself, I'll shoot at 60, 70, 80 yards. And then sometimes every once in a while before I pack it up and am done for the day, I'll throw a couple at 20 and just watch it, or 30, and just watch them sink real quick. Exactly where I want, just to build that reassurance in my own mind that I got this. We're good to go. You know, and I think that, at least for me, that's part of just building that mental reassurance and confidence that I need to know that the shots that I'm going to have 90% of the time are good to go. Real world, I'm probably, especially on Texas dirt, 40 yards is probably the farthest I'm ever going to shoot a whitetail at. And even then, like I've had this year, every deer that I killed, which not a lot, but some, they were at 40 yards at one point in time and give me a shot opportunity, but I had no interest in shooting them at that range because I'm going to let them settle into my area. I have a food source. I'm going to let them settle in, and then I'll take my time with my shot to make the shot that I want to make. So
it's funny because we brought this full circle. You
yeah,
know?
We did.
You talked about limitations, and the limitations that you were talking about is kind of what I was alluding to earlier with the mental limitations that you put on yourself. You know you can make that shot, but that confidence isn't there to do it out in the woods, you know, not that you can't do it physically, but that confidence just isn't there. So you become hesitant to do it out in the field. So
yeah, man. Yeah. It is funny that we come full circle with that, but it is all tied together. And I think that this has been a really outstanding discussion about all this stuff, and we've hit a lot of valuable topics, but at the end of the day, it's not that we're talking about this because there's a right or wrong answer to any of this. A lot of it is unique to a shooter. The equipment that they have, we didn't dive into a whole lot of equipment specifics other than the sight, but the equipment that they have, but then you as a shooter, you know, everybody has their own limitations, and it's up for you to play your own mental game. So
yeah,
perfect point.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that needs to be touched on is we are going to have our limitations, and we're going to try and improve those as much as we can throughout the year by practicing repetitions and getting out there and knowing our equipment. But we are hunting wild animals, and there's always that chance that they're going to duck, they're going to move, they're going to take a step. And so as much as we practice, there's still that chance that something's going to go wrong.
Yeah, we all practice, and I'm 100% confident saying the four of us sitting here all have a very high sense of reassurance in our own mind that we are solid bow hunters and archers. And I don't mean that to sound arrogant, but it wouldn't be right for us to talk about this if we didn't have a level of confidence and experience behind it. But every single one of us sitting in this conversation, we've all missed. We're all gonna miss again. Nobody is perfect, and we are not experts by any means. We will never be experts. There's not an end goal to this. It's a journey, and the journey is where it takes you. So
it's funny because You guys all brought up a great point that it's up to the individual shooter to develop the feel and their own technique and that sort of thing too. And that kind of brings me back to when I used to coach, baseball. I tell people all the time, if I had a hitter that was batting 500 but had the absolute worst technique, you know what? I don't care what his technique looks like, because his outcome was very productive. Same thing. If you develop a feel for shooting your bow, you might not have the best technique, but if it's successful and it's good for you, you need to go with it. Just like equipment. People ask me, what type of bow should I get? I'm like, well, first of all, I say, hey, you have to get elite. You got to try the elite channel. And then I say, but in the end, you got to find one that fits you. What's comfortable for you? Same thing with shooting. Yeah. Develop your own techniques. Develop that comfort level to make yourself more successful as a shooter.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen, before we conclude it? All right. Well, I greatly appreciate all y'all taking the time to sit down and talk with this. This has been an awesome podcast, and honestly, I think the four of us could probably sit here for 3 or 4 more hours if the wives would let us and talk about all this stuff, but that's probably not going to happen today. I'm sure we'll get another group together to follow it up with another one at some point, but for now, for our listeners, thank you all for listening, for watching the video if that's what you're doing. If you have not already, hit that follow and subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Fall Obsession Podcast is on all major podcast platforms. We are on Carbon TV, Waypoint TV, and our YouTube channel is where you can find the podcast videos. On that YouTube channel, be sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff, because we post a lot of cool videos. Social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Go Wild, TikTok now. We're on there too, Fall Obsession Media on TikTok. But go follow, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We post daily on those platforms. FallObsession.com is the hub. It's where you guys can go to find all of our content, all of our media series, podcasts, gear reviews, wild game recipes, all of our gear and apparel, which I think all of us in some form or fashion are rocking something. So head on over there and check it out. We just got some hats back in stock and everything, so want to get those out to y'all, so go pick you one up. Ridge Rock Hunt Company, that's the hat Nick has on. They are the podcast partner. Derek and Lacey over there in Mississippi, they book hunts with vetted outfitters across the country. They got 50 or 60 plus outfitters in their network at this point. They've been growing that brand for a couple years. But if you are looking to book that once-in-a-lifetime hunt you've been saving up for, that adventure experience that you want to go on, you've been looking forward to, give Derek a call. He talks to you about location, time frame, licensing, opportunities, all that kind of stuff. Really easy guy to talk to and get to know, so head on over and check out Ridge Rock Hunt Company. Gentlemen, thank you all again. We'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Pleasure's all mine.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you all for listening. We're back again next week, as always, for another Fall Obsession podcast episode. I have to say it because Todd's sitting here. Stay obsessed.
That's right. Stay obsessed.